I want to tell you exactly what I saw. I want to tell you what I did next. And I want to tell you what the bishop said to me 3 days later in my own kitchen that I have never been able to fully forget, not in all the years since, not even now. But before I get to any of that, I need to tell you something about the woman I was before that afternoon. Because what happened to me after I found them matters less than what happened to me after the bishop spoke. And what the bishop said, I am going to make you wait for it a little longer, because it is the kind of thing that needs context before it can land with the full weight it deserves. I have been carrying that sentence for 19 years. You can wait another few minutes. I was 26 when I married Samuel. I was 31 when I found him. 5 years of marriage, 2 children, a farmhouse I had scrubbed and kept and made into the kind of home that received compliments from the older women in our district, which in my community was the closest thing to an award you could receive. I had done everything correctly. I want you to understand that. I had done every single thing that was asked of me, and I had done it well, and it had not been enough. And what I am about to tell you is the story of how I learned that doing everything correctly in a world with broken rules does not protect you. It just means you are standing closer to the thing when it breaks. Before I go any further, I need to say something directly to you. Over 90% of the people watching this right now have not subscribed yet. And every time I think about that, I think about how many people are listening to this story in the dark, alone, maybe recognizing something in it that they have never had words for. If that is you tonight, if something in what I am saying is pulling at something you have been carrying, please subscribe before we go further. It is completely free. It keeps these stories alive. It means I can keep telling the truths that took me years to be allowed to say. And while you are here, tell me something in the comments. What is the one memory you find yourself returning to over and over again? I want to know. I read every single word you write. Samuel was not a man anyone would have looked at and seen trouble. That is the first thing I want you to understand, because it is the thing that made everything harder afterward. He was well regarded, he worked hard, he showed up, he said the right things at the right moments in the way that certain men learn to do when they understand instinctively that reputation is its own kind of currency. The older men in our district respected him. The bishop liked him. My father had approved of him immediately, and my father was not a man who approved of things immediately. Samuel had a quality of steadiness that read from the outside as character. I believed it was character for 5 years. I believed I had married a steady man and that the life we were building was solid, and that the occasional coldness I felt from him was simply the way of men in our world. Contained, not given to demonstration, expressing care through provision rather than tenderness. I made excuses for the coldness. I want to be honest about that. I made excuses the way women in my community were taught to make excuses. By reframing them as virtues. He is not cold. He is serious. He does not say much, but he provides well. He is not warm with the children, but he is present. I had been taught since girlhood that the interior life of a marriage was the wife's responsibility to manage and interpret, and I managed and interpreted everything in Samuel's favor for 5 years, because that was what I had been taught a good wife does. Now I need to tell you about the afternoon. But first I need to tell you something that happened 3 weeks before the afternoon, because it is the reason I was where I was when I saw what I saw. And this part, this detail I am about to share, is the part that changes what you think you understand about the story. Stay with me. 3 weeks before that afternoon, I had been in the pantry sorting the preserves when I overheard 2 women from the district talking in the yard below the open window. I could not see them. I could hear them clearly. They were talking about Samuel. They were not saying his name, but they were describing him well enough and describing a situation I did not recognize from my own life. And I stood in that pantry with a jar of pickled beets in each hand, and I understood very slowly that the conversation happening below my window was a conversation that had been happening without me for some time. That other people in my community knew something about my husband that I did not know. That the silence I had been living inside was not accidental. It had been maintained around me by people who passed me at church and asked after my children and accepted the food I brought to community suppers and said nothing. I did not say anything either, not for 3 weeks. I watched Samuel more carefully. I looked for things I had not been looking for before, and found that once you are looking, they are not difficult to find. The particular way his eyes moved sometimes when we were at community gatherings. The occasional evening when he came home later than the work explained. The quality of his absence that I had been calling seriousness for 5 years and now had a different name for. I watched and I waited and I told myself I needed to be certain before I did anything because in my community, making an accusation you could not prove was its own kind of transgression. And then one Tuesday afternoon in September, I went to the barn to tell Samuel that dinner was ready and the barn was empty, and I knew, the way you sometimes simply know things without being able to explain the mechanism of knowing, that he was not on the property. And I walked to the edge of our land where the path runs along the creek toward the Yoder property, and I followed it because something pulled me there. And I am still not sure whether to call that instinct or grace or simply the end of 5 years of not looking directly at something. I am not going to describe in detail what I saw. I will tell you that I saw enough. I will tell you that the woman was someone I knew, someone who had eaten at my table, someone whose name I had spoken in ordinary conversation, in the ordinary way you speak the names of people who are simply part of the landscape of your life. I will tell you that for a moment, a long, strange moment, I felt nothing at all. Just a kind of vast quiet, the way they say it goes quiet in the eye of certain storms. And then the quiet ended. I did not make a scene. I know that surprises people when I tell this story. I turned around and I walked back to the farmhouse and I went inside and I stood at the kitchen counter and I put both hands flat on the wood and I breathed. My children were in the next room. My daughter was 6. My son was 4. They were playing the way children play, with the total absorption of people who do not yet know that the world contains the thing I had just seen. And I stood at the counter and I thought about them, and I decided that whatever I did next, I was going to do it without falling apart in front of them, because they had not done anything wrong, and they deserved a mother who could stand upright. Samuel came home for dinner. He sat at the table. He said grace. He ate. He spoke to the children about ordinary things. I watched him do all of this from across the table, and I thought about how long a person can perform normalcy, and whether the performance eventually becomes the thing itself, or whether underneath it the knowledge is always there, humming like something left on in an empty room. After the children were in bed, I told him what I had seen. I told him where I had been and what I had witnessed, and I told him I needed him to tell me the truth about what it was. He was quiet for a long time. And then he said something I was not expecting. He did not deny it. He looked at the table and he said it had been going on for 8 months and that he had not known how to stop it and that he was sorry. He said sorry the way you say a word you have practiced, correctly shaped, but hollow inside. And I sat across from him and I thought 8 months. 8 months of Sunday mornings and community suppers and my hands making his food and washing his clothes and raising his children, while 8 months of something else was happening. And the community apparently knew, and I was the last to understand. I told him I needed time to think. He slept in the barn that night. I lay in the bed we had shared for 5 years, and I stared at the ceiling and I thought about what my options were. And here is where the story becomes the part I really need you to hear. Because my options were not what your options would be. I had no bank account, I had no driver's license, I had no education past the 8th grade, I had 2 children under 7, I had a community that was the only world I had ever known. And I had a faith that I had been told my entire life contained the answers to every question I would ever face. So I did what I had been taught to do. I went to the bishop. His name was not important. What is important is that he had been the bishop of our district for 20 years, and that he was considered wise, and that I had spent my entire life being told that the leadership of the church was where you brought your troubles. I sat across from him in my own kitchen 3 days after I had found my husband with another woman, and I told him what I had seen and what Samuel had told me, and I waited for the church to do what I had always been told the church would do, which was to help. What the bishop said to me in that kitchen is the reason I am making this video. It is the sentence I have carried for 19 years. It is the thing that broke something in me and also, eventually, set something free. Are you ready? Because I need you to understand that what he said was not said cruelly. It was not said with anger or contempt. It was said in the gentle, measured voice of a man who believed completely in what he was saying, and that is almost the most frightening part. He said, "Hannah, I want you to think carefully about what your husband may have been lacking at home. I want you to sit with that sentence. I want you to feel the full shape of it." My husband had been meeting another woman in secret for 8 months. He had sat at my table and said grace and looked at my children and come to bed and done all of this while carrying something he had chosen to carry. And the bishop, the man I had come to for help, the man who represented everything my community claimed to stand for, looked at me across my own kitchen table and asked me to consider what I had failed to provide. I did not say anything for a long moment. I was looking at my hands in my lap. And then I looked up and I said, with the quietest voice I have ever used, "Do you believe this is my fault?" And he said, "Not entirely, but a marriage is a shared responsibility, and a husband's straying often reflects an unmet need, and a faithful wife examines her own contribution before she assigns blame elsewhere." I went to the bishop for justice, and the bishop handed me a mirror. He handed me a mirror and asked me to look at my own face in it while my husband's was turned away. And I want you to understand that in the world I lived in, this was not considered an outrage. This was considered wisdom. This was the teaching. This was what the structure of my community had been built to produce. Women who, when wronged, turned the question back on themselves. I drove home from that meeting and I sat in the wagon for a long time outside my own house. And something happened in me that I have thought about many times since. It was not rage. Rage came later. What happened in that moment was quieter than rage. It was more like a door closing very softly on something, a door closing on the part of me that had believed the community would protect me. That part, the part that had trusted, that had brought her broken life to the bishop and expected something back, that part closed the door and went somewhere quiet inside me and did not come out again. I stayed for 2 more years. I want to be honest about that. I stayed because of my children and because I was afraid and because leaving the only world you have ever known is not a decision you make in the aftermath of a bishop's meeting on a Tuesday afternoon. I stayed, and I watched Samuel be brought before the church and given a period of correction that involved sitting separately during services for 6 weeks, and then being restored to full standing while I was counseled by the deacon's wife on how to be more attentive to my husband's spiritual needs. The woman I had seen at the creek was also given a period of correction. I saw her every Sunday for 2 years. I passed the bread across the table to her at community suppers. I said her name in ordinary conversation. The community closed over what had happened the way water closes over a stone dropped in a pond. The surface smoothed, the ripples disappeared, and underneath, everything was exactly as it had been. The same structures, the same rules, the same careful arrangement of who was responsible for what and who bore which consequences. I left at 33. I will tell the full story of leaving in other videos because it deserves its own telling. I will tell you that leaving cost me almost everything I had known. I will tell you that the first years outside were harder than anything I had faced inside. I will tell you that there were nights when I sat in a small apartment with my 2 children asleep in the next room and thought about the bishop's sentence and felt the weight of it. Not because I believed it, but because I had believed it once, and the residue of that belief does not wash out quickly. In the world I found outside, I learned a word I had not had before. Gaslighting. It means being told that what you saw, what you experienced, what you know to be true is actually a reflection of your own failure. It means being handed a mirror when you came asking for justice. My community did not call it gaslighting. My community called it counsel. But the mechanism is the same, and the damage is the same, and the long, slow work of undoing it is the same, regardless of what you call it. If you have ever been handed a mirror when you deserved an answer, I see you. If you have ever been told that the wrong done to you was actually a question about your own adequacy, I see you. If you have ever sat in a chair across from someone who was supposed to protect you and felt the ground move beneath you as they handed the weight back, I see you. You were not the problem. The system that told you that you were the problem was the problem. And the fact that you carried that sentence for as long as you did, turned it over, examined your own face in it, tried to find something you could fix, that is not weakness. That is what people do when they have been taught since childhood that authority is trustworthy and that if something is wrong, the place to look is inward. It takes years to unlearn that. It takes longer than it should. And you are not behind because it has taken you this long. I am not behind. I left at 33. I rebuilt at 33 with 2 children and no bank account and no degree and no map. And I am still here. And the bishop's sentence, the one I carried for 19 years, I am putting it down now. Right here, in front of you. I am putting it down because it was never mine to carry, and I think perhaps the act of saying that out loud, where someone can hear it, is its own kind of freedom. Before you leave, I want to thank you for staying with me all the way to the end of this. I know this was not an easy story to sit inside, and I know you could have left at any moment and you did not, and that means something real to me. But I want to be honest with you about something. More than 90% of the people who watch these videos have still not subscribed. And if this story reached something in you tonight, if the bishop's sentence landed somewhere familiar, if you recognized yourself in the woman who went looking for justice and came home with a mirror, I hope you will subscribe before you close this. It is free. It takes 1 second. And it means these stories keep reaching the people who need them. Tell me in the comments what part of this stayed with you. Tell me if you have ever been handed a mirror when you deserved an answer, or simply tell me you were here tonight. I read everything, every single word, without exception. Until next time, remember this. You were never the problem, and the voice that told you otherwise was never as powerful as the truth you already knew.